You have met someone like this. Someone who has been through things that should have destroyed them. Things that would have destroyed most people. And instead of being broken by it, they came out the other side with something that most people will never develop. A kind of intelligence that has no name in any classroom. A kind of awareness that cannot be taught in any institution. A kind of quiet dangerousness that you feel before they say a single word. These are not lucky people. These are not people who had it easy. These are people who were broken all the way down to the foundation. And what they discovered at the foundation changed them forever. Today we are going inside that transformation. Not to romanticize suffering, but to understand what it actually produces in the people who survive it. And why the most broken people you will ever meet are often the most dangerous and the most brilliantly smart. Stay until the end, because the final truth in this video will reframe everything difficult that has ever happened to you. Most people think of being broken as the end of something, as the destruction of capability, as evidence that a person is less than they were before. But psychology tells a very different story. Carl Jung spent decades studying what happens to people who go through catastrophic experiences, and what he found consistently disrupted the comfortable assumptions of everyone around him. The people who had survived the most were not diminished by it. They were forged by it into something that people who had lived comfortable lives could not quite understand or replicate. Something harder. Something more perceptive. Something that had been tested in conditions most people only encounter in theory. Being broken is not the end. For the people who survive it and integrate it, it is the beginning of the most dangerous version of themselves that has ever existed. In the next 20 minutes I am going to show you exactly what being broken produces. Why the person who has lost everything reads people better than anyone else in the room. Why the person who survived betrayal sees through manipulation that others cannot even detect. Why the person who rebuilt from nothing has a relationship with fear that most people will never develop. And why the world underestimates broken people at its own cost. The first thing that breaking produces is the ability to read people with terrifying accuracy. Think about what the experience of being genuinely broken actually involves. Someone or something that you trusted completely turned out to be different from what you believed. The reality you were operating from turned out to be a misreading. The signals you were relying on turned out to be unreliable. And the cost of that misreading was enormous. Not theoretical. Personal. Felt in the body. Processed in the dark hours when nothing else was available to distract from it. And the mind that went through that process came out the other side with an upgrade that cannot be purchased or studied. Hypervigilant pattern recognition. The ability to detect the gap between what someone is showing and what they are actually doing. The specific sensitivity to microexpressions and tonal inconsistencies that develop in people who learn through painful experience that these gaps exist and that they matter enormously. This is not paranoia. This is precision developed through the hardest possible teacher. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should accept the things we cannot change, but never stop studying the things we can understand better. The broken person has been forced into a level of study about human nature that most comfortable people never undertake. Not by choice, by necessity. And the intelligence that produces is genuinely dangerous to anyone who relies on being misread. The second thing that breaking produces is an entirely different relationship with fear. Most people operate with fear as a primary governor of their behavior. Fear of failure keeps them from starting. Fear of rejection keeps them from asking. Fear of loss keeps them holding on to things they should release. Fear of the worst-case scenario shapes their decisions at every level. But the person who has already lived through their worst-case scenario has a relationship with fear that is fundamentally different. Not because they no longer feel it, because they have evidence that they can survive it. The specific evidence that the worst thing they feared happened. And they are still here. Still functioning. Still building. Still capable of more than they were before. That evidence changes the calculation permanently. When fear says if this goes wrong, you will not survive it, the broken person has a different answer than most people have. They have already been to that place. They know what it actually looks like from inside. And the reality of it is survivable in a way that the imagination of it never is. Epictetus taught that the person who has learned to fear nothing has not become reckless. They have simply developed an accurate assessment of what is actually threatening and what only appears threatening from a distance. The broken person has that accuracy in a form that most people spend their entire lives trying to develop, theoretically and never fully achieving. Because theory about fear and first-hand experience of surviving it are not the same thing. Not even close. The third thing that breaking produces is an intolerance for anything that wastes time. Time takes on a different quality. When you have been through something that could have ended you, the comfortable person can afford to drift, to stay in situations that are not quite right but are not quite wrong enough to leave, to delay decisions that need to be made, to maintain relationships that are neither nourishing nor significantly harmful, to spend their hours in ways that produce no real return but cost nothing obvious. The broken person cannot do this. Not because they are more disciplined in the conventional sense. Because something changed in their understanding of time that cannot be unchanged. When you have been to the place where nothing is guaranteed, when you have lived through the experience of loss that felt irreversible, when you have rebuilt from a place that most people do not even know exists, the hours of your life become weighted differently. The tolerance for drift disappears. The willingness to stay in the half-right drops to zero. The patience for people and situations that consume energy without returning it runs out faster than it did before. This is not cynicism. This is the specific efficiency of a person who learned through direct experience what time actually costs. And that efficiency is its own form of intelligence that most people mistake for coldness, because it looks like coldness from the outside. But from the inside it is simply clarity about what matters and what does not, about what deserves the hours and what does not, about the difference between the things worth building and the things worth releasing. The fourth thing that breaking produces is the ability to rebuild with nothing. Most people have never had to build from zero. They have had setbacks. They have had difficulties. They have had times that were hard by their own standard. But they have not had the specific experience of looking around and finding that everything they relied on is gone. The financial foundation, the relationship structure, the identity built around a role that no longer exists, the community built around a situation that ended, The self-concept built around a version of themselves that the events have made impossible to maintain. The person who has stood in that emptiness and rebuilt anyway has a capability that no comfort can produce. The knowledge that they can start from nothing and arrive somewhere. Not a theory about this. Not a belief in this. The actual demonstrated personal evidence that they have done it. And that knowledge changes the risk calculation on every future decision. The person who has rebuilt from nothing once is genuinely less afraid of starting from nothing again. Not because it would not hurt. Because they already know the outcome is survivable. Already know that the beginning with nothing leads eventually to something. Already know what the process looks like from inside it. And that knowledge is the most powerful form of confidence that exists. Not the confidence that comes from never having failed. The confidence that comes from having failed completely and rebuilt anyway. The fifth thing that breaking produces is a sensitivity to inauthenticity that operates almost like a physical sense. The broken person has been lied to. Not in small ways. In the ways that cost the most. The lies that organized their reality around a false premise. The relationships that presented as one thing and functioned as another. The environments that felt safe and turned out not to be. The promises that were made with full confidence and not kept. And the mind that went through the process of discovering those lies and integrating the cost of them developed something remarkable. A specific and highly calibrated detector for the gap between presentation and reality. For the quality of performed authenticity that most people cannot distinguish from the real thing. For the specific texture of words that are technically true but functionally misleading. For the way certain kinds of people hold themselves when they are not quite telling the whole story. This sensitivity makes the broken person dangerous in any environment where performance and reality are different. Which is most environments. Most of the time. Because the broken person is seeing something that others are not seeing. And acting from that information while appearing to simply be present. The sixth thing that breaking produces is perhaps the most misunderstood quality of all. Empathy that has weight. Most people experience empathy as something that happens in the mind. A cognitive recognition that someone else is suffering. An intellectual acknowledgement that their experience is real. The broken person experiences empathy in the body. When someone tells them about a loss. When someone describes the specific quality of a certain kind of pain. When someone tries to explain what it felt like when everything they relied on was no longer there. The broken person does not have to imagine it. They already know the shape of it. They have lived inside something close enough to recognize the outline from the description. And this produces a quality of presence with people in pain that most people simply cannot offer. Not because they do not care. Because they have not been to the place the broken person has. And being witnessed by someone who has actually been there is a fundamentally different experience from being witnessed by someone who is trying to imagine their way to it. This is why broken people are often the most sought after when someone genuinely needs to be understood. Not because they are warm in the conventional sense. Because they are real. In a way that cannot be performed. The seventh thing that breaking produces is a clarity about identity that most people never achieve. Before you are broken, you often do not know which parts of your self-concept are genuinely yours. And which parts were constructed for the comfort of the people around you. The roles you filled because they were needed. The traits you performed because they were rewarded. The version of yourself that was acceptable in the environments you occupied. When everything is stripped away, when the performance cannot be maintained because the audience is gone or the energy is exhausted, or the situation has changed so completely that the old performance is no longer relevant. What remains is the actual self, the irreducible core, the part that was there before the roles were assigned and the performances began. And knowing that part, having been forced to meet it in the absence of everything else, produces a relationship with your own identity that is fundamentally different from anything constructed in comfort. It is not better in every way. It carries scars. It has edges that were not there before. But it is real. And the person who knows their real self with that level of directness moves through the world differently from the person who has only ever known their performed self. They are harder to manipulate because there is less gap between what they show and what they are. They are harder to destabilize because what they are built on was tested. And they are harder to misunderstand because they have no particular investment in being understood a certain way. They know what they are. That is enough. Being broken is not something to seek, but it is something to understand differently than most people do. The person who has been through it and survived it and integrated it carries something that has no substitute. A form of intelligence built from direct experience of the hardest possible things. A relationship with fear that comes only from surviving what was feared. An efficiency born from knowing what time actually costs. A capability to rebuild that has already been demonstrated once. A detector for inauthenticity that operates below the level of conscious thought. An empathy that has weight because it has been earned. And a clarity about identity that cannot be produced in comfort. The world will often underestimate you because of what you have been through. Let it. Because the people who underestimate the broken have never been broken themselves. And they have no framework for what it produces. You do. That is the most dangerous advantage available to any human being. If this found you in a place that needed to be found, subscribe. This channel is for people who were broken and chose to build anyway. Drop this in the comments if you know exactly what this video was talking about. I was broken and I built anyway.